Bearing in mind that you had people like John Jacob Astor and Madeline and Margaret Brown, the Guggenheim, and all of these first-class passengers who boarded at Cherbourg were transported out to Titanic by Nomadic. She was in service right through until Queen Elizabeth and Queen Mary were taken out of service, believe it or not. She survived and served with distinction in both world wars. And then when she was taken out of service, she was eventually turned into a floating restaurant and taken up to Paris. She was moored just opposite the Eiffel Tower, actually, and she was there as a restaurant through many guises, including Japanese and French, right through until 2000, 2001, when her mooring license expired. They'd had to take the upper decks off to get her through underneath the bridges. And then a new superstructure was built as a floating restaurant.
Welcome to Season 3 of Titanic Talk. Nelson Aspen and Alexandra Boyd launch once again onto the digital airwaves with some very special event episodes. Here we feature stories from the independent documentary Ship of Dreams Titanic Movie Diaries and continue to explore all aspects of the iconic ship. From James Cameron's epic, groundbreaking movie to the history and legacy of Titanic herself. Actors, historians, authors, descendants and fans come here to talk about Titanic. This is your first-class ticket to everything aboard the Ship of Dreams. Ship of Dreams Titanic Movie Diaries is distributed in the US by Freestyle Digital Media. It's now available to rent or own on Apple TV, Amazon, and many other platforms. Please be sure to like and leave a review.
I'm Nelson Aspen, and Season 3 of Titanic Talk is in full swing, and we're having so much fun. And we have a very distinguished guest who also happens to be quite entertaining. My lovely co-host, Alexandra, the filmmaker behind Ship of Dreams, Titanic Movie Diaries. Please make the introduction.
Well, I'd like to first give some credit to Dr. Michael Martin in Cove of the Titanic Trail, who introduced us to this guest, who also I was very charmed and privileged to have Ship of Dreams Titanic Movie Diaries screen in Liverpool this last Titanic weekend, because that was all due to our guest, David Scott-Beddard, who is the chairperson, the big cheese, the huge poobah of the British Titanic Society. And we patched me in live from Joshua Tree, which sounds terribly glamorous, but we got like a last minute Wi-Fi hookup, and I was able to present the film, and everyone there got to see our film. And of course, not only, but also all of the stuff that David does in the world of Titanic and beyond. We had to have him come on the podcast. David Scott-Beddard, welcome to Titanic Talk.
Welcome, David.
Thanks, Alexander. Thank you very much for that quite humbling introduction. It's certainly better than I get from the BBC or Sky or CNN. And thank you also to Nelson for both inviting me along this evening.
Well, we always start these conversations with somebody's Titanic origin story. There are a lot of very similar ones, but I'd love to know how and what you got how you got involved with Titanic, and now the work you're doing with the society.
My beginnings with Titanic is pretty much like the majority of people. It's either through books or models. My father bought me a model of Titanic when I was about 8 or 9 years old, and we sat together and built this model. I say Titanic. There's a bit of a crash at the end. Pardon that pun. Yeah, we sat and spent a couple of weeks building this model in the evenings before I was dispatched to bed at 8 p.m. And when the model was finished and it looked really fabulous, and then I turned the lid of the box over and it said Lusitania.
Oh,
what? Whose mistake was that?
But at 8 or 9 years of age, I didn't really know the difference. So that set me on a path. But in particular, it was around about 1995, something like that. My parents bought me a limited edition print from a painting by the world-renowned artist Simon Fisher, and it was in fact it's the one behind me on the wall. Oh, it's that side, of Titanic entering Queenstown, and it's signed by two survivors. So I started to collect these limited edition prints, and then I started buying little White Star Line bits and pieces. And then eventually, around about 2000, about 25 years ago, I met up with my business partner, John White, and we were doing a deal in a pub car park at 8 o'clock at night. You know, it looked very, very dodgy. As well, I'm handing him some White Star Line silverware, and he's handing me a brown envelope with some money in. It's it's a story John loves to tell. And we suddenly realized that if we put our collections together, we had quite a formidable collection to start exhibitions. That has moved on 25 years on now. We have one of the largest collections in the world, and I think I'm quite confident in saying, and very proudly, that we are one of the leading Titanic exhibition companies in the world, White Star Memories. We're contracted at the moment to 5-year contract with Exhibition Hub, who are probably one of the world's leading exhibition companies, not just Titanic, but very much in the art world. And they also specialize in immersive technology. So the exhibitions are a new level, taking them to the new level, and we're very excited and very proud to be part of that.
Wow. I'm always fascinated. I've been to the museum in Pigeon Forge, and there was a recent, what I would say, a traveling exhibition here in Seattle. And there's so much stuff that has been collected from a ship that's at the bottom of the ocean. I'm fascinated with how you keep those pieces between the traveling. Like, is there just this huge insurance and sort of a Brinks-Mat van that drives around the place with armed guards taking everything? I mean, all of your precious things.
To move these exhibitions, I mean, there's something like 25,000 square feet. There are, I think, 10 or 12 galleries, including a 4,500 square foot immersive section where you can sit in a full-size lifeboat. And all around you, 360 degrees, there's a 12-minute story told. It starts with, you can see the ship coming towards the iceberg, and then the story from that point onwards. And you're sitting there in a lifeboat, and the floor looks as if you're actually in the middle of the Atlantic. It's very emotive. The galleries start at the very beginning with telling the general story of Titanic and people's fascinations. So you'll have collectibles or posters, books, DVDs, VHS movies that people collect now rather than play. And then, of course, there's a lot of memorabilia from the movies, not just the Cameron movie, but some of the previous films as well. In that gallery, there will also be a model of Titanic. I think the largest one we have is about 12 feet. And from there, you move on to a boarding scene. From the boarding scene, you're then on the ship. You walk through the corridors. You experience as if you were a passenger, as if you're taking part in the whole story. And then there are cabinets with artifacts that fit each of those galleries. And then, of course, you go through into the dining scenes. You're on the bridge. The bridge is quite incredible because it has windows, and you can see out to sea, and there's a clock ticking, and the time, it's telling the story. And you can even see the condensation running down the windows as it starts to get dark and the temperature drops. And then you're in the grand staircase, which is absolutely breathtaking. And from there, you go onto the crow's nest. You can stand in the crow's nest and look out and watch the iceberg coming towards you, and from what happens there. Through into the Marconi room, then this immersive gallery. From there, you go into the post-sinking galleries. And as you leave the exhibition, you can go into a VR room. So you put the headset on. I've only ever done it once, and it was mind blowing. It just to be able to you put the headset on and you're walking into this the person standing next to you says, okay, David, what can you see? I said, well, I can see this corridor. And she said, okay, walk down the corridor. I said, but I'm only seeing a corridor. She went, that's fine, just whatever you see, just follow it. And your body at first doesn't want to move because you think I'm virtually blindfolded, but it isn't like that. You follow, you get down the corridor, you turn right, you're on the bridge of the Keldish, and then you go through into a room where you go down to the wreck. This little bit, this section's a bit fanciful because you're standing on a platform. You're not actually in a submersible, and you appear at the bow of Titanic.
Amazing.
So you go round down the starboard side, and you come round by the boilers, and I can't really describe it. It's, I mean, as a scuba diver, I remember the first time I went diving, and it was a practice diver in a swimming pool, the first time you ever breathe underwater, and it was in a swimming pool, and I was sitting on the bottom of the swimming pool with a regulator in my mouth and the mask on, and it was just like being in a dream, and I immediately had a flashback to that moment. Um, and then you're inside the ship, and then it becomes daylight, and you're back on April the 10th, 1912. You're in Southampton, you're waving people off. It's a completely new level of a Titanic exhibition.
And
And
where is this
Can we see it?
occurring now? And are there more than one? Tell us how we
there
can
are,
experience this for
yes.
ourselves.
Currently, the full scale exhibitions are in Atlanta, and then we opened in Milan. The Milan exhibition has now moved to Hamburg. We also have an exhibition in Cologne. We have two smaller exhibitions in New Orleans and Cincinnati. Very shortly, there will be an exhibition opening in Denver, and then we're going to Singapore, I believe. So there will be
It's such a
seven.
global, I mean, everybody
Yes.
everywhere in the world is interested in this. But do you find that
Yes.
there's a certain demographic or nationality that is more fervent than others, or is it just universal?
I have to say, Nelson, it is universal. I was really shocked at the response in Milan. We had something like 30,000 visitors through in the first 2 months. And I believe over a quarter of a million people saw that exhibition. Even after it closed, 6 months after it had opened, they were still queuing on the last day. Um,
Oh, the wine. I love it. He's one of us, Nelson.
Yes, yes, yes. With all of your artifacts and your extensive collections, you love all your children equally, I'm sure, but you must have some particular favorites that are closest to your heart.
you're talking about our artifact collection,
Yes,
aren't you?
not wine.
Um, there, as the collecting has been, and of course the collecting never seems to cease. Um, John Zeller, the CEO of Exhibition Hub, said, David, you don't need to buy anything else. You've given us 1,200 artifacts. You don't need to give us anything else. And then we'll have a Zoom conference about a week after that first statement. And I said, oh, John, I've got something you might be interested in. He went, yeah, okay, what is it? And I said, John White and I have bought the only known complete section of the Olympic aft grand staircase. And it's a full balustrade with the columns, all the wrought iron work, the light oak. It is absolutely breathtaking. We actually purchased it in July last year. We were very lucky to be able to secure the deal from, I hope you don't mind me mentioning his name. I'm sure he won't mind. But he's the owner of Havencrest Castle, Alan St. George. Do you know Alan? Have you had the privilege of speaking to Alan? Alan is a very, very talented sculptor and painter, and he bought this balustrade from Ken Marshall a few years ago. It had been in Ken's collection, I think, for about 30 years or so. And Alan tried to have it restored in the US, and it wasn't going too well. And so Alan is also friends with Bob Angel, who does all of our restoration work here in the UK, an incredibly talented man. And so originally, Alan arranged to send the whole balustrade over to Bob to have it restored for himself, and then returned to Havencroft Castle and installed there. John and I went down to see Bob about something else that he was restoring for us, and there was this balustrade in his living room while he was doing measurements and taking it apart. And it was one of those OMG moments, followed by I must have that moment. And so on the way home, we placed a phone call to Alan, who's a good friend of ours and a good friend of the British Titanic Society, the BTS. And he agreed to sell it to us because he knew what we would be doing with it, that we would put it on display for millions of people around the world to see. That restoration work is still ongoing. We hope to have it finished sometime in the next 6 weeks, but it is just spectacular. But of course, it's from Olympic. It's not a Titanic artifact.
Well,
Now,
but I was going to say, you know so much about your talents go so far beyond just the Titanic. And because one of the most fascinating things about your story that I find is what you did for the Nomadic. I'm going to actually go to Belfast to the museum for the first time this month. And I'm so excited to talk to you about what you did for the Nomadic. If you could tell us that Nomadic story.
John and I were exhibiting for Belfast City Council in the City Hall in 2005. I think that was the third time that we'd been invited to exhibit at the Titanic Made in Belfast exhibition. And whilst we were there, a lady, sadly no longer with us, Kathleen Neal, she was the CEO of Belfast Industrial Heritage. And Kathleen came to us and was telling us that she was desperately trying to raise the funds to save Nomadic, and was there any way we could help? At this stage, I think Kathleen had managed to raise only about £1,500.
Tell our audience what the Nomadic's connection to Titanic is.
Okay, yeah, Nomadic was designed actually, and like Titanic, Nomadic was designed by Thomas Andrews as one of the two tenders to carry passengers out to the Olympic class liners when they arrived at Cherbourg. The Olympic class were too big to dock in Cherbourg, so when they entered the harbour, they weighed anchor in the Rard, which is it's a large area, expanse of water, just inside the outer harbour wall. And then these two tenders, Nomadic and Traffic, took the passengers out to the liners. Now, they were built on slipway number 1. So you had Olympic in the middle and then Titanic on slipway 3. So her keel, Nomadic's keel, was laid on December 1910. Hope I've got this right. I'm going to look pretty foolish.
There'll be letters. There'll be
letters. Don't worry. If you get something wrong, you will be quickly and promptly.
Oh, absolutely.
So we're not worried about that. You know, we like hecklers.
Yeah, I could always claim another senior moment, can't I?
Yes.
But anyway, let's forget the dates. So she was built. Olympic had already been launched in October 1910. So pretty much Nomadic has been built alongside Titanic, built by the same craftsmen, the same workers, using the same materials. Inside, a lot of the woodwork, the paneling, the grill work on the iron work on board the ship, because she was designed for the first and second class mainly, as identical to the Olympic class.
The word offcuts comes to mind, like, oh, we've got some offcuts over here. Do you want to put it on the Nomadic? I'm being facetious, but like if she was a smaller ship, it might have, there was leftovers, right?
Little sister.
Yes.
Bearing in mind that you had people like John Jacob Astor and Madeline and Margaret Brown, um, the Guggenheim, and all of these first class passengers who boarded at Cherbourg were transported out to Titanic by Nomadic. So
And she was going
Nomadic
to be
had
scrapped.
to
She
be
was sitting there going to be scrapped, and you found her.
finding her isn't quite the right word, Alexandra, but she was in service right through until Queen Elizabeth and Queen Mary were taken out of service, believe it or not. She survived and served with distinction in both world wars, whereas traffic with the other tender that was built for the third class passengers, she was lost in the Second World War. And then when she was taken out of service, she was eventually turned into a floating restaurant and taken up to Paris. She was moored just opposite the Eiffel Tower, actually. And she was there as a restaurant through many guises, including Japanese and French, right through until 2000, 2001, when her mooring license expired. The gentleman who owned her then, they'd had to take the upper decks off to get her through underneath the bridges. And then a new superstructure was built as a floating restaurant. People will be able to find all of these photos and the story.
Some people
on the
listening may have actually eaten in that restaurant 25 years
Who
ago.
knows? So then, after her license was revoked because she needed a new hull inspection, and they wouldn't allow it to be done via divers, so the license was revoked, and the Nomadic was then seized by the Port Authority for non-payment of mooring fees. So she was then taken to Le Havre and was heading for the scrapyard. So she was put up for sale, put up for auction in Paris, and John and I launched the SaveNomadic.com appeal, and we had pledges of something like £60,000. We didn't ask people to send us money. We just said, "We'll pledge us the money so we can go to the auction and try and bid." And during this process, we found out, people always say to me, "Oh, if you want the thing done on your computer, get a junior or a teenager to do it." And we had a 17-year-old webmaster, and he rang me up one day and he said, "David, Big Brother's watching." Said, "Right." He said, "Yeah, the Irish government are logging into SaveNomadic.com at least three times a day to watch the counter clock up of how much of our pledges are." So I picked up the phone and I rang the permanent secretary in Northern Ireland, Alan Shannon, his name was. And he went, "Well, how do you know all this?" And I said, "Well,
Amazing.
we've got a child running the website." And so we had a laugh over the phone. He invited us over. We went to see him, and he said, "Well, are you going to be able to raise enough money to bid on Nomadic?" And I said,
Did you have
"Sadly not."
any idea what the reserve was, or what? Or
Yeah, in true French fashion, the first auction, which I believe was October 2005, the reserve was €500,000. But they announced before the auction started that if it didn't meet reserve, they'd arrange a second auction in January and they would drop the reserve to €250. So naturally, nobody bid. So on the 26th of January 2006, Belfast City Council sent one of their representatives to Paris and they secured Nomadic for €250,001. So Nomadic was brought back to Belfast on a floating barge in the July of that year. And when she came back, there were over 30,000 people came to see her at the quayside by the Odyssey.
My goodness, it must
in
have been so
Freedom.
satisfying for you and so exhilarating for you.
It really was, Nelson.
restoration was then a restoration fund needed to bring her back.
Yeah. From that moment onwards, we set up the Nomadic Preservation Society. I was then fortunate to be appointed by the Department for Social Development in Northern Ireland as the project manager. So I went to live in Belfast when the restoration work got underway. Our first plan was to satisfy the public curiosity and try and get her open, which we did the following Easter, 2007. We'd spent that winter clearing her out with a team of volunteers from organisations such as the World Ship Society, and some other bodies within Northern Ireland. Um, Extern springs to mind. They help people get back into the community after maybe being in prison or something. So John and I put an exhibition on board, and we opened in the April, and we had over 18,000 visitors, I think, during that summer period. And then, of course, once we got into October, we closed. We took her back to her mooring for the winter to do more work during that winter period to open the following year. Meanwhile, the government had set up the Nomadic Charitable Trust to oversee the restoration and to raise funding. But once a hull inspection was carried out, we realised that she did need to be dry docked to have some work done. So there was no opportunity to open her the following year. They'd run out of funding by this stage, so the three of us who were actually employed, we were laid off. I came back to the UK, and Alexandra, I know you're going to be interested to hear this bit. I was then appointed as the sales and marketing director of Auto Sleeper Motorhomes in the Cotswold here in the UK. So when they did,
we had a little back and forth about my vintage Airstream because
Yes.
we like to trailer parking.
So that was the end of my involvement with Nomadic. And then, of course, once funding was secured, Harland and Wolff then took over the restoration project.
Aren't you back to it all over again with these train cars that you've found? It's all about to happen all over again. We must have a plug for that so people know how they can support these train carriages.
4 years ago, a friend of mine who was on the board of the National Railway Museum in York contacted me and said, David, you might be interested to see this newspaper article. And it was about two London and South Western Railway, that's a mouthful, LSWR railway carriages that were languishing in some sidings at a historic railway, a heritage railway in Pontypool and Glenavon in South Wales, which ironically is where all the coal used to come from, the steam coal that was mined for the ships of the era and railway engines. And these carriages are believed to have been part of the Titanic boat train special that carried passengers from Waterloo to Southampton on the 10th of April 1912. Now, that's not my fanciful interpretation. This is the story that was given to me by the elderly retired major who owned these carriages. Sorry, Captain Charles James, a fantastic gentleman. And these carriages have been in South Wales for the last 25, 30 years. And he's done his best to try and keep the weather out, but they are in a very dilapidated state. Now, it's not known exactly. We've done a huge amount of investigation work into the boat trains. There was two of them, but there are no records to say which rake of carriages, which set of carriages were on which train, because they were just an extra train that was put on. But the investigative work that we did, by the time we'd broken down to how many of these specific carriages, they're both dining cars. They're called tri-composite, so you could seat second and third class passengers at one end. There's a kitchen in the middle, and then a small first class separate section at the front. And both of these carriages are identical, built in 1907 and 1909. And there was only about, I think, 8 or 9 of them that had been built by this stage. So if you think about the possibility of one of these carriages being on each of the trains, there's a strong possibility they may have been part of the train. Now,
I love that scene in Night to Remember, where the opening scene of Night to Remember with Charles Lightoller on the train.
Yeah, but I always thought that Charles Lightoller travelled over from Belfast on Titanic, but hey, I'm not quite sure. I'm no expert.
I will make sure that in our show notes we have all the links to your websites and to this website, because you're raising funds to restore them. And what's the plan? Where would you want their resting place to be? Will they go to Belfast?
No, they won't. The carriages will be moved down to the Midhants Railway, the Watercress line in Hampshire. And part of that section of Heritage Railway, as it is now, was part of the line that went from Waterloo to Southampton. Certainly the third class train went through there, if not the first class train. But it's a beautiful heritage railway now, that they've got wonderful facilities for restoration work. We've been fundraising for the past 3 years. We've secured enough money now to have two brand new. These carriages are 64 feet long, by the way. They're not small. So we've just had two new tarpaulins made for them. We've spent the last 2 years visiting the railway to build internal securing structures in them. So we've spent thousands of pounds on wood, would you believe, and screws just to hold these things together, because we don't want to put them on a low loader and take them down one of the main arterial motorways of the UK and have bits falling off everywhere.
It's falling off on the motorway.
And we've already we have charitable status, so that this isn't just some fantasy. This will be happening.
Yeah,
We have charitable status. We have already submitted our first application for Heritage Lottery funding, which was rejected, which we knew it would be. They always are first time. So we have a team working on a second application. White Star Memories, John and I are sponsoring the project to the tune of £250,000 over the next 5 years, £50,000 a year. We have members, we have people joining and paying a membership fee. We have volunteers ready to come along as soon as the carriages are going to be moved, I believe, towards the end of next month from South Wales down to Hampshire. The ITV and the BBC have shown a great deal of interest in following the project and filming it. There is already a film segment on our website, which is titanicboattrainheritagetrust.org. I know it's a mouthful.
And will they be part of the museum? I'm like, is it going to be like a little cafe?
These carriages are going to be fully restored to 1912 condition, and they will be used on the line as part of a Titanic boat train special. We already have 3 other carriages earmarked, LSWR carriages from that period, that will be part of. So there will be at least 5 carriages on this train. So
and you'll have a steam engine that will pull them, so you'll really feel like you're taking a trip to Southampton to get on the Titanic.
Absolutely. Without a shadow of a doubt, this is going to be one of the premier Titanic attractions in the world.
Thrilling.
Yes.
You mentioned about you mentioned about the similarity between Nomadic and the carriages. Part of my job as the project manager was to look into the options of what could be done with Nomadic, right from static dry, as she is now, with no engines, static afloat, no engines, static dry with engines, static afloat with engines but not commissioned, and fully operational. But of course, this was just as the banking crisis hit in 2008, so the money wasn't available. But we'd had Nomadic inspected by the authorities, the MCA, Maritime Coast Guard Association, who looked at Nomadic and said she's in good enough condition to be put back to sea as a tourist attraction. But sadly, that didn't happen. The difference this time is we actually own the carriages.
They don't need to be seaworthy. It's a slightly different situation.
Well, they will also be able to travel on the main line, but not with passengers, but they will be able to travel from one heritage railway to another. So they won't be exclusively based at the Midhants Railway. We hope to be able to take them to other heritage railways around the UK, and who knows where from then.
David, we will have to have you back once they are in service again. We will have to have you come back, and that appeals to me so much, is to go and see those carriages. I've been close to steam engines and that lovely sort of nostalgic feeling of The Railway Children, which is one of my favorite movies as a child. That whole romance that steam engine era brings, Titanic notwithstanding. It sounds like the most wonderful plan.
And just your care for history and especially as it concerns the Titanic, is so important to all of us who have such an affection. So we owe you a great debt of gratitude, and what a legacy you are building.
The British Titanic Society is probably now one of the most active Titanic societies in the world. As you know, we've just had our annual convention in Liverpool, and we're going to Cove, which used to be Queenstown in Southern Ireland next year. We have members all over the world. We have representatives in the US as well as in Europe, and it's really exciting times. And we see one of our main. You spoke earlier about Pigeon Forge and Branson, and John and I in particular, but also the British Titanic Society, work extremely closely with them, and I know it's their passion as well, to make the Titanic community much more cohesive. And a great thanks to you guys as well, because you're doing a tremendous job on that as well.
Well, we've met some of the most amazing people, David, and we just, not that we want to cap our community size, but just when we think that's it, we're sort of done. My movie is out there, the podcast has had over 50 episodes. We meet somebody else, and somebody else has got a new project, and somebody else that we want to talk to. And Nelson, publishes his book, which is Titanic based, and I'm planning a book for our diaries. So it will just keep going. And we keep asking ourselves, why, what is the fascination with the stories, the hundreds of and a couple of thousands of stories that are associated with the ship herself, and then ripple effect, excuse the pun, the ripple effect is this and us talking right now. It's amazing.
Sorry, I was going to say,
you came to us through Dr. Michael Martin, whom I met 17 years ago when I was doing an Irish television show, and he boomeranged back into our lives all these years later, and here we sit with you. So it's divine intervention somehow, I think.
It's an absolute pleasure, but I just wanted, before we stop, I just wanted to say, you asked about why is this fascination still with us, and in the UK, Titanic is part of the national history curriculum, so every school student learns about the story of Titanic. So there's a new generation of Titanorex coming down the line. Isn't it great?
All the time. Yes, that's a very good point. Thank you so much, David. Thank you.
We're so grateful. We look forward to meeting you in person one of these days.
Yes, I look forward to that too. Cheers.
Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review. And if you'd like to hear more podcasts like this, hit the subscribe button. For information on where you can see Ship of Dreams, Titanic Movie Diaries, go to shipofdreamsfilm.com. Titanic Talk is a production of Ship of Dreams Film Limited. We've launched a line of Titanic Talk merch, a cap, a mug, a tote, a t-shirt or a hoodie. You'll be sure to find a unique gift for the Titaniac in your life. Look for the link in the notes and on Instagram, or go to bit.ly/Titanic Talk Shop.